and it's the end of the world, and there's nothing I can do. There are lots of things that we can do. Don John of Austria did not say, stay home and pray your rosary. He said, come with me, we're going to war. And we need to have the same attitude right now. If it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. We don't know that. Plenty of people in the past thought it was the end of the world, and they went out in the desert, and they hid out, and they missed the war, they missed the battle, they were missing in action. That is not going to be us. We have a war to fight, a war in the name of Christ the King. We're going to fight this war. We're not going to get discouraged, and we have to have little meetings like this to keep ourselves prepared to go back to the front line, right? So that I look at you and I remember this night, and we have this talk, we have this time together, and sometimes I feel discouraged maybe down in the future. I'm going to remember you, and you're going to remember me, and you're going to remember each other. We have to keep each other on this battlefield. It is a court-martialable offense to destroy the morale of the army, of the soldiers, no matter how outnumbered we are. It doesn't do any good for us to say we're going to lose. We don't have a chance. We do have a chance. History is one after the other stories of Christians, followers of Christ, who were completely outnumbered and didn't think they had a chance. It started with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ crucified on the cross. Think how they must have thought at any moment. Mary Magdalene, St. John, they must have thought, his followers, he's going to get off the cross at any moment. He's not going to let this happen. He's God. He's going to smite these enemies. He's going to take these Romans out. And he says it is finished, and he breathes his last, and he dies. And that's where it begins, this war for Christ the King. And that's where it begins. Mary Magdalene doesn't lose faith. She goes to the tomb. She's still full of hope. She's still full of faith. She's afraid, but she goes. And from this witness, from this dark moment in history, the darkest moment in the history of the world, comes, of course, the Christians and the Colosseum, comes the pain and the suffering of martyrdom and persecution, but then ultimately the greatest civilization that the world has ever seen in Christendom comes out of very humble beginnings when people were very outnumbered. So that's where we are now. But we have to be realistic. How many, for example, here are not is there anybody here who's not a traditional Latin Mass Catholic? Anybody new to the fight? A couple maybe here and there. It's so important that we as traditionalists, those of us who have been at it for a long time, to understand there's going to be a great influx, and there already has been, but also to reach out lovingly to people who are just beginning to figure out that something's very wrong here, that our church is under attack, to reach out lovingly and lead them to Christ. There's a temptation, because they've been making fun of traditionalists for a long time, ever since I was a little kid, mocking them, calling them schismatics, calling us outside the church, calling us more Catholic than the Pope. So there's a temptation now to say, told you so. We were right all along. We're the best. We're the best. We're the greatest. You guys were wrong. We have to resist that temptation, because what we want is the largest possible coalition of Christians that we can muster in the world right now. And I'm going to tell you, we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's a lot better now than it was, despite we're going to talk about Traditionis, custodes. We're going to talk about the attack on the Mass. But I want to preface that by saying I remember 1972. I remember 1975. I remember masses in hotel basements. I remember priests who were thrown out of the cold. There was no Fraternity of St. Peter. There was no Society of St. Pius X. There was no Order of Priests like you have here. There was nothing. So it's better now. There are millions and millions of us. There are thousands of young priests. We'll talk about the Chartres pilgrimage in a moment, from Paris to Chartres, 3-day walking pilgrimage. We did that this summer. There were 1,000 priests there. I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but there's endless number of young priests at Chartres this year. Realistically, I think it was between 300 and 500. A lot, in other words, that we're not there in the early days. Keep all of that in mind, and I'm certainly not, many of you, obviously most of you know this or you wouldn't be here. So my job tonight, as I see it, is just to remind us not to get discouraged, to stay in the war, and to understand now. This is very, very important. You saw the speech last night? Everybody see the speech last night, President Biden? Pretty terrifying moment. Pretty terrifying moment. A man who's unhinged. A man who's is a Catholic, is an apostate Catholic now, losing his mind, or maybe, it looks like. He seems to be the only one in the room who doesn't realize that he hides his own Easter eggs. He's nuts, right? But he's got the levers of power, most powerful country in the world, He comes out and gives a speech as though he's running against Donald Trump, and just by name condemns Donald Trump, condemns the MAGA movement, condemns all of you, condemns 75 million Catholics, American patriots, essentially, as a bunch of racist Nazis who are a threat to the democracy. He declared war on us, all of us. Very weird. I've never seen, I'm a political science major, I've studied politics, been involved in politics all my life. I have never seen anything like this. It's not an election year. He's not running against Trump. Why is he so fixated on us, on patriots, on Christian America? Why is he trying to fire up, incite violence against us? Do you know why? Because they don't have an answer for us. They don't have an answer for Christian patriotism. For people like us who are willing to fight, who mostly, by the way, as Solzhenitsyn said, mostly just want to be left alone to raise our children. We're not on offense. We're just trying to be left alone and raise our kids and live our lives. But if they're going to push us, we do have answers that they can't compete with, and so they have to criminalize us. Again, as kids here, it's not even close to being all the way over or something we got to conclude there's nothing we can do about it. There certainly is. And by the very fact that the President of the United States makes a speech like this, we know that we're the ones that they fear because we have the answer to everything they're trying to do. We are in the way of what they're trying to do. And that's what that speech was all about. They've run out of ideas. Hilaire Belloc said that when they start persecuting the Christians again, it means the revolution has failed because they failed to change what's in here. They failed to brainwash us. And so the only thing they can do is raw force and violence, starve the lions again. And friends, we're seeing the exact same thing happening. I don't mean to scandalize anybody here, but you all know we've got a massive problem in the Vatican, an apocalyptically scary problem in the Vatican. But what's interesting in terms of what happened last night with President Joe Biden, the same thing is happening there. And we've talked about this a lot before, running TV. What in the world are they thinking? There supposedly is this big pandemic, right? The world is locked down. Kids are set years behind because they've been locked out of school by these policies. You got more monkeypox and whatever the heck else is coming. You got financial breakdown. You have food shortages. You have supply chain shortage or breakdowns, right? And in the middle of all of that, and in the middle of massive apostasy in the Catholic Church, Pope Francis is worried about us. A tiny, tiny little remnant. This, friends, should be the most encouraging thing we can possibly tell our children. They're really, really worried. Why? Because we have the pearl of great price, because we have kept the faith, because they have not brainwashed us, they have not forced us into apostasy. And even though we're a very tiny remnant of believers, we dominate their thoughts. They dominate their strategy and their concerns. These children are going to grow up. I just came back from the Chartres pilgrimage, 20,000 young people. The average age was 20 years old, marching from Paris to Chartres. And the Vatican sees it. They know the future of the Catholic Church is in this room. The future of the Catholic Church is the traditional Latin Mass. And so they're resorting to this violence, this Traditionis, custodes, to try to crush us because they can't compete. Many, many years ago, Cardinal, or was the Archbishop at the time, Ranjith from Sri Lanka, made this point. He said, if we don't do something, the Novus Ordo Mass is going to die, and there will be only the traditional Mass left in the Church. So the Vatican has been talking about this for a long time. Traditionalists in the Church, patriots in the country are getting the same treatment from a couple of old globalist guys, octogenarians, who represent very powerful people. That simply is the reality. So Biden last night is calling us Nazis. Pope Francis, when he returned from Canada back to Rome, again, someone asked him about contraception, whether he's going to green light contraception. He said morality must evolve. So he's essentially already preparing the minds to green light contraception. And then out of nowhere, he just tears into traditional Catholics. He says this is the problem with traditional Catholics. They're what he calls backwardists. We're backwardists because we're not evolving with morality and with the Church. And more interesting, he said we are guilty of sin that we are sinful backwardness. So you see the pattern. Attacking patriots in our country, attacking traditionalists worldwide out of the Vatican. It would be myopic for us to not see something very serious is happening here. And we're right at the center of it. And of course we have to pray. And of course we have to ramp up the prayer. We can turn to the rosary, obviously. And we have to have meetings like this and strategize our survival. Because the main thing that we have to do now, and you know this, the main thing we have to do is not come up with this brilliant strategy whereby we are going to take the globalists down. The main thing we have to do is not be seduced. Keep the faith. And this is going to become a difficult task because everything you see is going to suggest that science has disproven God. God doesn't exist. This is the devil at work. That's what's happening. So keeping the faith is not going to be as easy as we may think. So we have to get together like this to make sure we help each other to keep the faith and then to face the reality that what we saw last night in Philadelphia with Joe Biden was like the Reichstag fire in Nazi Germany in 1933. They have reached an impasse. They can't go further unless they criminalize us because they can't beat us by fair means. So we have to hone our polemics. We have to make good arguments. So what are they saying right now? They're saying that they must cancel the traditional Latin Mass because those who attend the traditional Latin Mass reject unity. We're disunifying, right? All of you are violators of unity, Christian unity. That's what they're saying. Here's your argument in answer to this, because we have to fight. We are not going to give up the Mass of our fathers. We are not going to give up that Mass because that Mass is the touchstone of our faith, the faith of our fathers. So we decide right here and now, like the three amigos, we're in this together, and this time we will not back down, we will not give up the Mass. So when they say that we violate Christian unity, for example, the answer is so obvious. Francis, Your Holiness, the polls out right now, new surveys, show us that in the United States alone, 3/4 of all Catholics in our country today, that's something like 85 million Catholics, 3/4 of them have already rejected the new Mass. They don't attend Mass even on Sunday. Remember when you were in Catholic school and you were taught that it's a mortal sin to miss Mass on Sunday? 3/4 of our co-religionists in this country don't give a darn about that. They don't go to Mass on Sundays anymore, and I don't even blame them. The church has let them down. But the reality is, when you have 17 million out of 80-something million Catholics not going to Mass on Sunday, they've already made their statement. The new Mass is caused them to leave the church, rejecting that Mass. They don't attend it anymore. So why does the Vatican, looking at the same statistics that we can easily find, where millions and millions have left the faith, going to that Mass over the past 50 years, the Vatican is saying, you must go to that Mass as well. Fathers, mothers of children, would you do this to your children when you see something so destructive to your children's lives and health, and you tell them to do it anyway? These are our fathers. These are our shepherds, these people in the Vatican. Why do they want us to do the same thing that has left millions of Catholics disenfranchised and outside the Catholic Church? When you consider the statistical evidence, it becomes impossible for us to go along with this. St. Robert Bellarmine famously said, even if a pope were to try to destroy the church, if he were to try to destroy the church, we have an obligation before God to not obey and to frustrate his will. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what one father of the church said. And we're to the point now where there are entities inside the Vatican who are clearly trying to destroy the faith. Now why? Is that a conspiracy theory? Just crazy talk? They're trying to destroy the faith because of something called religious supremacism. You know, they talk about equity and inclusion, don't they? Davos, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum. Everything is about equity and inclusion. The Catholic Church established an old world order that united the entire world behind the cross of Jesus Christ, the kingship of Jesus Christ. If you're going to set up a new and Christophobic world order, you have to get rid of the Catholic Church. And that's what they've been doing for an awfully long time. And we simply, before God, cannot go along with this. So that's what we have to talk about. That's the conversations that we're going to have. What if they shut us down? What about obedience? What about the bishops? What about the hierarchical structure of the church? And we're going to have conferences about it. We're going to talk about this, but we have to have conversations about it. The faith must come first. So prepare to follow those early Christians into the catacombs, to have their mass, to bury their dead, to pray, to keep the faith. We don't want to go up top and become lion food, but we need to prepare for that possibility. We need to prepare to follow the Vendéans in Western France who rejected the Freemasonic French Revolution to such an extent in 1789 to 1799 that 500,000 of the original traditional Catholic French, our forefathers, were slaughtered by the revolution that prided itself on liberty, equality, and fraternity. What today they call equity and inclusion. We got to prepare to follow them. We don't want to. We want to fight so we don't have to follow them to the ultimate sacrifice, but we have to talk about it. We tell the stories of the Vendéans. We tell our children the story of St. Tarcisius and the Christians, the early Christians. We tell them the stories of the Cristeros, right? Why? Because they're heroes. Have you ever heard about a story, have you ever told your children a story about the great so-and-so Catholic who, up against impossible odds, was tolerant of everybody? Just said, I just want to be left alone. He was so super in that regard. Ever heard of a hero that said that? I just tolerate. I'll take you as you are if you take me as I am. It's ridiculous. Our stories have always been about people who took a stand and who put their lives on the line for Christ, for family, for country, right? Well, those are the stories that we tell ourselves. Those are what we want to be, so let's prepare for it. Last time I was here, we talked about it's not just a duty, it's the greatest honor of our lives, right? To have the chance when so many are deceived. You look, I was in an airport a couple days ago, looking what's happening physically to our fellow human beings. Pierced, tatted, multicolored haired, out of control, at war not only with their souls but with their bodies. I don't blame them. Who's doing this to them, right? So we have an opportunity to say, no, we're not going to be led into that hell on earth that millions have been led into. And it's an honor. And if we have to die a little prematurely, so be it. To stand next to St. Thomas More, St. Edmund Campion, the Cristeros, the Vendéans, the early Christians, so be it. What a way to check out. And before we check out, we're going to give them hell. We're going to fight with everything that we have so that they will not deceive the people who are behind us and who are looking to find a way out of this darkness. That's the reality, the honor of what we're doing. So they say now, you heard of this I'm going to butcher his name, Shia LaBeouf. All right, well, I'll just shorten it. He's Indiana Jones's kid in one of the Raiders movies, apparently, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I don't know if that movie's any good. I don't know if Shia is a nut job who's going to be a Buddhist 6 months from now or not. I do know he made a lot of sense in that interview with Bishop Barron. I do know that he represents millions of young people because we've seen it. Like I said, that parish in Denver, from 4,000 to 22,000 families, right? Lots of Shias out there going, holy cow, what is going on? What is going on? Not a matter of opinion. Did you see this character priest, so-called Catholic priest? He's been all over the internet using his guitar to bless everybody after Mass, holding it upside down and blessing everybody with his guitar. Go in peace, he says. This is blasphemy. This is satanic. This is what they've done with the Novus Ordo. It's not, of course, that's one of the worst cases, scenarios of it, but that's what's happening. No one seems to mind that. They're too busy going after traditional Catholics. So this guy Shia, is speaking the truth. He's speaking truth to power, as they say, and it's a very common reaction to what's happening to the Catholic religion, to the Mass. People who are searching for truth find it in the Latin Mass. And they're trying to crush the Latin Mass? Why? You can't come up with anything else other than we're seeing the force of evil, the hand of evil in this. Just like Tucker Carlson said a few weeks ago on Fox. He said, I've tried everything else. I'm not a guy that runs around talking about the apocalypse. I'm not quoting scripture. I didn't grow up that way. But he says, when I see what they're doing right now, especially the kids, there's only one thing. There's only one conclusion. It's evil. This is a war between good and evil. I couldn't agree more. And the same thing happening in the Catholic Church. So this story, ironically enough, God is good, the story of Indiana Jones's kid becoming a Catholic and crediting the traditional Latin Mass as his inspiration for why he became a Catholic. He calls it Padre Pio's Mass because he's in a movie playing Padre Pio, and he realized in the course of his study that the traditional Latin Mass is truth, and he embraced it. While that story was exploding, there was another little story in Rome where Pope Francis had appointed 22 new cardinals, each one more radically leftist than the other. Each one terrible track record on LGBT masses and supporting Father Martin and being weak on abortion and encouraging communion to pro-abort politicians. Vaccinating everybody on the face of the earth is the only way to get. Each one of these guys. But when this little story comes along with a little actor who's obviously a little eccentric, but speaking the truth about the Latin Mass, it stole all the headlines. I thought it was so ironic. You know why it stole the headlines? Because as far as the world's concerned, one actor out in Hollywood speaking this way has more power than all the bishops in this country combined and around the world. You know why? Because nobody cares about these guys anymore. With their woke ideology, their heterodoxy, the games that they're playing, the fact that they're terrified to speak the truth, and as much as I'm eager to take them on, I'm also ready to praise and step in behind the Bishop Schneiders, the Cardinal Burkes, the Archbishop Viganos, the Bishop Strickland, now we got Bishop Tobin, the good one out in Rhode Island. Bishops are waking up, praise God, and we're getting ready for this war. But for the most part, this guy out in Hollywood trumps all the stories. So this conversion to the Catholic faith in the middle of the enactment or the enforcement of Traditionis custodes, this dominates the headlines, and so a new cardinal, Arthur Roche, who's the prefect of the Congregation of Divine Worship, he was in the Talbot magazine, in the UK magazine, and he said, when he was asked about Shia, he said, well, I'd like to talk to this guy. Like, yes, of course you would, because it's an embarrassment that this has been overshadowed. They've been overshadowed. And in the same interview, he says, because we have to be careful. We can't criticize, the Latin Mass. What's happening, he said, with these traditional Catholics, and now the Shia guy has joined the traditional Catholics. What's happening is they're criticizing Francis, but what really is at stake there is the criticism of Vatican II. Because as you know, there's no criticism allowed of Vatican II. Whatever that even means anymore. I say to Cardinal Roche, well, that may be, Eminence, but at least traditional Catholics know what Vatican II is, or was. Do you think anybody gives a rat's keister about Vatican II in the vast majority of Catholic parishes throughout the world? They don't even know what it is. There was a funny thing. I can't think of the cardinal's name. He was doing an interview with some young kids in the Vatican, or out in St. Peter's Square, and he told a story. And he said, when he said, does anybody know what Vatican II was? The bright young college student said, of course, that's the Pope's summer residence. That's where we stand. But now the new Cardinal Roche, who's trying to take away your Latin Mass right now, so he's a part of your life, He says in the same interview, it is very serious, it's a very serious matter opposing Vatican II. In the end, people have to ask themselves, am I really Catholic or have I become more of a Protestant, he says. This is the guy who partakes in Protestant ceremonies, by the way, prayer services, by the way, but who's keeping track of that. But I would say to the Pope, or to this cardinal, who was taking your Latin Mass away from you, helping Francis do that, which Vatican II are we talking about? Which Vatican II? And this is another one of those arguments. You can forget most of everything I'm saying, it's fine. Remember a couple of these points. First, that we've talked about already, the vast majority of Catholics have already rejected the new Mass, so it's not our fault. And secondly, Vatican II. This is the argument that I think works the best. Which Vatican II are we talking about? And you need to ask your priest, your bishop, anybody who accuses you of this, okay, fine, I don't want to be a sinner, I don't want to go to hell. What are the dogmas of Vatican II that I'm rejecting? What is it in Vatican II that I as a Catholic must accept on pain of mortal sin and jeopardy of my soul? And which dogmas, defined dogmas of the church, am I rejecting? And then just get all synodal on them. Listen to them. We're listening. Please tell us, which dogma am I rejecting? There are none. There are no dogmas in Vatican II. There was nothing defined dogmatically in Vatican II. You're not rejecting any dogmas in Vatican II. You're rejecting something else. And the question is, what is it in Vatican II? Which Vatican II? Benedict XVI, when he was still Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, there's a little longer quote, you've heard it, but I'm going to read it again because we're being accused of rejecting Vatican II. Cardinal Ratzinger, head of the Holy Office, says, what happened after the Council, Vatican II, he says, was something else entirely. In the place of liturgy, as the fruit of development, came fabricated liturgy. We abandoned the organic living process of growth and development over centuries and replaced it, as in a manufacturing process, with a fabricated, banal, on-the-spot product. That's what Cardinal Ratzinger thought of the Mass, what's happened to the liturgy, that we are being ordered to attend. A banal, on-the-spot product, says Ratzinger. Move ahead a few years, to 2013, now Ratzinger becomes Pope Benedict XVI. In one of his last speeches to the Roman Curia, I just found video of this, it's going to be in the next Rendon Underground. I was glad to find the video to verify this is true. Here's what he said. Remember, this is the Pope, the immediate predecessor. We're being accused of rejecting Vatican II. Here's what he said, Benedict XVI. So dominant and more efficient, he says, this council, Vatican II he's talking about, created many calamities, so many problems, and so much misery. In reality, seminaries closed, convents closed, the liturgy was trivialized, and the true council was struggling to materialize, to be realized. What he's saying there is that the media, I don't agree with him on this, by the way, but this is what he said, and it's an argument you can all use. The Pope, February 14, 2013, said the council had been commandeered. It had been taken over by the media. The whole world got a version or a vision of the council that the council fathers never intended. Okay? So whose fault is that? He doesn't say you guys got to go dig up the true council. He's saying the whole world was given a council that crushed the church, that trivialized the liturgy. So it seems to me, Cardinal Roche, Pope Francis, that if traditional Catholics are rejecting the council, we had better reject the council that Benedict XVI was talking about, because it crushed the faith. The Holy Father himself admitted this. You're just scratching your head. What are we talking about here? What are we talking about? There was a council that everybody must believe that wasn't dogmatic, but it never quite materialized the way they wanted it to. So there's another council called the Council of the Media. That's a bad council, but that's the one everybody got. That crushed the church, however. And then there's this other thing called the Spirit of Vatican II. Nobody knows what that is. But you got to accept it and don't question anything, Cardinal Roche says. You can't go to your traditional Latin Mass anymore because you're not figuring this out. You're not accepting Vatican II. You think this is our fault on any level? We have an obligation before God, it seems to me, in a time like this when the faith is on the line, to take what is sure and what is secure, because they're not giving us anything sure or secure. And then what is sure and secure is the faith of our fathers that was handed down to us. The Mass of history. The Mass of Padre Pio, of St. Thomas More, of St. Thomas Aquinas, all the way back to the apostles. That's the sure thing. We have an obligation before God to make sure we hold fast to that, when so many have lost the faith for refusing to hold fast to it. You see? We have an obligation not to follow what these men are saying. And we're never, ever, ever leaving the church. These clowns are not pushing us out of Mother Church. She is my church. She's defined my life. I have 7 children. Every one of them has been baptized, confirmed, all the sacraments in the old rite. I couldn't sleep at night outside the Catholic Church. I have no intention of leaving the church. But these guys are going to. Whether God does it or some wonderful human aegis takes care of it, I don't care. We're not going anywhere. We're going to stay and fight. Because they're making things up. I'll give you another example. It's Cardinal Roche, the guy who's taking your Latin Mass on behalf of Francis. He says, quote, after 2 world wars, he's trying to say why it's so important that you don't question Vatican II. After 2 world wars, which had been initiated in the heart of Christian Europe, it was obvious that there needed to be an enormous reform within the church, and that was Vatican II. Have you ever heard of the 2 world war argument that Vatican II was a result of 2 world wars? What's he talking about? What's he talking about? Well, he's making it up. Because you remember what the Pope said, John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, what he said when he opened the council. This is what he said as he opens the council. He says, divine providence is guiding the church today toward a new order in human relations, wherein, by men's own efforts and even beyond their greatest expectations, the superior and inscrutable designs of God's will are being fulfilled. He didn't say anything about world wars. In fact, what does he do? Famously, he condemns what he calls the prophets of doom, who were saying there were problems in the world, like my father was saying at the time. By the way, he was a prophet of doom. But John the 23rd says nothing about this. So they're making it up. And we have to ask ourselves, why are they revising history? Why are they changing the historical record? And you know the answer to that. It's because there's a new order that needs to be built. And Holy Mother Church in her human element has been recruited to help them build it. And remember this, the Church of Jesus Christ, the divine element, is inviolate. That's the one we would die for. But that the human element of the church can be corrupted and infiltrated certainly is true, not only in our time, but in previous times in history. And that's what's happened. The human element of the church has been infiltrated. Why? Because it is the true church, founded by Jesus Christ, outside of which there is no salvation. You see, beginning to put it together, this is a satanic war on the cross. And they've recruited men in our own church to set up what they're now calling, by the way, you heard it here first, New World Order is too controversial, that's a stupid conspiracy theory, YouTube will get you for that, Facebook will pull you down. So they've changed it now. Make a note of this, it's no longer the New World Order, it's the liberal world order. According to the Conference for Foreign Relations, according to the Vatican, Davos, the UN, the liberal world order. And all the while now, as this thing happens, we just got locked down for a couple of years. Economies are destroyed, which is on purpose. All the while, this chaos is happening. The church is falling apart. These men are blaming us. They're blaming you for it because you're not accepting Vatican II. You're not going along with the program. This Cardinal Roche, again, he says the Vatican II reforms are taking place, But it's a slow process because there are those who are dragging their feet and stubbornly opposing what the church has actually decreed. That's us. We're dragging our feet. This tiny little remnant of nobodies like us are stopping the mighty Vatican II reform of the world. It's such a joke. It's such a joke. And meanwhile, what do we think? What have they done to the priesthood? They've stamped it. I'm not going to get into any details, but they've stamped our holy priesthood now with the Jimmy Martin stamp of approval. When most people think of the Catholic priest, they think of pedophiles, they think of sexual abusers. This, again, is satanic. But they're blaming us somehow for the mess that the church is in right now. Vatican bank scandals. You have bishops and priests now who are going to prison. I'm not going to go into it here, it's too scandalous, but Bishop Zanchetta, I'm sure you know, he was actually accused of, you know what, in Argentina. Guess where he took refuge? The Casa Santa Marta. That's where the Pope lives. That's where this abuser priest hid from the law. He was a friend of Francis. Francis gave him cover until he was just now, a couple of months ago, sentenced to some years in prison. He was guilty as could be. And you're to blame because you're not accepting Vatican II. This is a distraction, you see? It's a distraction. The Vatican bank scandals, the sex scandals, the priests, bishops, the corruption that's going on is through the roof. And you are not to blame. We are not to blame. It is because of the grace of God alone that we have hung on to the faith of our fathers. It's been a grace and a gift to see what millions can't. It is not our fault, but we stayed in the church, and we're never going to leave the church, and they're blaming us. Francis spent every month of 2022, do you see the prayer intention for September? For the abolition of the death penalty, because it's a violation of the dignity of the human person, he says. Wouldn't it be fantastic if the Pope gave at least 1 month in 2022 to the abortion holocaust, which is also something of a violation of the dignity of the human spirit, wouldn't you agree? Not one word does the Vatican say throughout all of 2022. In every month they have a video prayer intention, their prayer, the Pope's Prayer Network they call it. Not 1 month has anything to do with abortion. Because they're too busy going after us, traditionalists, the folks who want to return to some sanity in this church. Friends, I'm running low. I'd like to take your questions, but I want to end with this idea of never again. I remember, as I told you, I remember what it was like. I was confirmed by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre when I was 10 years old. I knew the heroes of that movement. I saw what it was like. I saw how much the priests suffered. Priests, good priests, by the way, I hope we can talk during the Q&A about the fact that pioneer traditional Catholic priests back in the early 70s were also saying the new Mass because they were caught between a rock and a hard place. And that's going to happen again right now. There are so many great priests right now who, because they don't want to abandon the families in their parish, are still saying the new Mass. They're open to the Latin Mass. They're on our side. They're our friends. We need to bring them and have conversations with them. They too are a gift from God. But the point is, as far as we're concerned, those of us who are in positions to make this decision, I'm not talking about what a priest should do or what a bishop should do or anything else, but lay people, we can make this commitment. Never again. We will never abandon the Mass of our fathers, which means we need to prepare for war, some sort of war, whether it's just the spiritual one, we've already engaged in that, or some sort of physical persecution, we'll have to go underground once again into the catacombs in order to preserve the faith. Because this revolution, as Bishop Snyder says so beautifully, it's not going to last long. These revolutions never do. Soviet Union fell, the Nazi Reich lasted 11 years. This one will fall too. It's untenable. So what we have to do is make sure we outlast it and we outbreed it, because that's not going to be hard. They're not having any kids, are they? I see a few right here. There's the future of the church just running down the aisle right over there. There she goes. That's the future. That's what we mean by unite the clans. There's a little story I'll close with. I think it was World War I, heard it years ago. but when they say how disunifying we are. Beautiful story. Germans and Americans are, after the war, after World War I, there's all sorts of troop movement. People are being returned to their countries, prisoners are being released, and all of this. And there's this moment on a train platform in Germany, liberated now, where as they're switching cars in a train station, you have Germans on one side, a bunch of American GIs on the other side. And of course, they've been fighting each other for a while. And they start kind of staring at each other like, where's this going to go? I got a chance maybe to take one of these guys out. He killed my friend. I could, keep the war going a little bit. Getting kind of testy. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, one guy had an idea. And he looks across the platform and he goes, Credo in unum Deum. And with that, both sides erupt into the creed. And the moment is diffused. And the brothers are brothers again. That's what the traditional Latin Mass actually does. Unites the four corners of the earth. Every man, woman, and child. And if you've never been to the Sharp Pilgrimage, I encourage you to go. When you feel what it's like to do that for 3 days, to have been struggling with your English, and everybody speaking French and German, and then you go to the magnificent Mass in the Chartres Cathedral, and you sing that same Credo in unum sanctam catholicam, one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. You see? That's why I think it's satanic what they're doing, because they're trying to break apart that unity and that beautiful order of Jesus Christ, our King. That's what they want to do. And we can never, ever let them do that, friends. They do not have the right to take away our Mass. They do not have a right to make that order. That is an unjust order to stop attending the traditional Latin Mass. They have no right. I would encourage you then to be confident in this battle, to stay together, to keep together on this thing. Don't get discouraged. Don't lose the faith. Don't let them get inside your head. Klaus Schwab and all these guys, they're just like Adolf Hitler. They're going to go the way of the dodo bird eventually. It doesn't matter. The cross is still the most powerful symbol in the world. That's not going to change. But we need to hold it up. Don't let them attack us. Don't let them demoralize us. To not hold that cross up just like our forefathers did in the faith, so that it can be seen high. Joan of Arc, right? Hold the cross higher so I can see it over the flames. That's us. I have every confidence in the world that this is going to, in the end, the Immaculate Heart of Mary is going to triumph. Christ will be with us always. And all we have to do, unite the clans, never surrender, and keep the faith of our fathers. Thank you so much for listening. Sure, absolutely.
Michael, we've got a question from the audience here. What do you see on the horizon and the kind of approach that traditional Catholics who might have an understanding of this direction that you're talking about tonight would reach out to the faithful Catholics that are part of the Novus Ordo that haven't experienced the traditional Latin Mass in some decades?
I think it's really important that we understand and appreciate, like I said, the honor of where we are. We always quote Sister Lucia of Fatima when she's talking about the diabolical disorientation, right? The whole world is diabolically disoriented, including us to some degree, to some level, right? So we have to understand that everyone is suffering right now through this darkness. It's become really obvious. So traditional Catholics, I think, we have to understand there are those who are saying, I don't know what to do. I can't disobey the Pope. I can't disobey the bishop. I got to just follow stay in the church. They're confused. We have to understand that's not their fault. So I would say we have to anticipate that fact. It's not their fault. They didn't ask for any of this. And we have to charitably try to make the case, resisting always the temptation to say, told you so. And this is going to be so much easier now. I'm sure you've all felt this. I run a traditional Catholic newspaper. Used to be everywhere I went, I was kind of like having to be on defense, and yeah, okay, here's what I think, don't hit me. Now I find that everybody's trying to prove their traditional Catholic cred to me. They don't want to own this thing anymore. Because over the past couple of years, what have we seen? It's not just a question of old Mass, Latin Mass, new Mass, whatever. We've seen them actually come into our lives and shut it down. Shut down the world. Mask us up. Force us to take some mystery juice that Bill Gates and his lunatic friends have made. That's pretty scary. And the whole time that this was happening, the Catholic Church was on their side. I'm talking again about the human element with some wonderful and amazing exceptions. They're on their side. And I think that's really opened up a lot of people's eyes. Like I just told you about this church in Denver, I hear this not only from all over the country, but from all over the world. But during COVID, tradition exploded. Traditional Latin Mass centers exploded. Ours certainly did. We're up in St. Paul. The bishop said, you got to shut the churches down because the governor wants to. We went out in the parking lot and had high-profile parking lot masses. Snowy Easter morning, one of my favorite masses of all time, outside with our priest in the snow. And people were looking at this all over the world. And the bishops of Minnesota were looking at this too. And guess what? In our case, one priest, the parking lot priest, said, no, you're not shutting us down. Worshiping God is necessary. It's essential. What happens? The bishops of Minnesota, not exactly stellar St. John Fisher bishops, to a man finally looked at the governor and said, you can go pound sand, we're opening the churches. Because of the example of one priest. A priest who, by the way, also offers the new Mass. His heart is with the traditional Latin Mass, but he has the faith. So he still offers the new Mass. I think one day he probably will be exclusively traditional. But he's a friend, he's a warrior. And I think we have lots of warriors, more than fellow travelers. We have fellow warriors who are stuck in Gulag, Nova Sordo, don't know quite how to do it. But let's go over there and see what we can do. And also, if Traditionis Custodes comes down as Francis wants to do, he's going after the diocesan priests more than he's going after the Fraternity of St. Peter. Why? He's going after the diocesan priests who are saying Latin Masses because they actually are making so many inroads now into the mainstream church. And he knows it. They should be paragons of unity. They're saying both Masses. What is more unifying than that in terms of the Vatican, how the Vatican defines unity? So I would say we have many, many allies in the Novus Ordo who are either lay people who are fed up, they realize something's wrong, or priests who are calling people like us and saying, where do I learn the Mass? And do you have a barn around that maybe we can have Mass in the barn or whatever? There's a lot of that going on. So I think it's a very exciting time. It's not the time to be shutting doors or to say told you so to our Novus Ordo friends. It's a time to have great conversations, bring them in, recruit them, because we need the numbers. And I think with the grace of God and the crisis that they see now, which has everything to do with civil liberties as well as an attack on spiritual liberties, is going to be very successful. So that's what I would say. Yes, please. Thank you.
Who's got a question for Michael? Jerry?
Yes. Michael, terrific. Thank you. It's so good to see you in person. I've been following you for many
Speak
years.
up, Jerry.
Thanks.
Please.
We're so grateful to have you here. We just love you to death. You've done such great work.
Thanks.
But my question is, what suggestions do you have for a priest when his bishop has more or less forbidden the TLS?
Well, that's a question that as a layperson, we have to not have, I don't think, a cookie cutter answer. Obviously, the answer is tell him to get lost. He's not going to do it. Forget him.
This
But
came from a good priest friend.
exactly. So we have to keep that in mind. And what's going to happen is if you just flagrantly, remember this, because it's obvious, but sometimes we forget as lay people, if he flagrantly just tells the bishop to get lost, he's going to get removed, and now he's got 400, 500, 600 families who are going to fall into the hands of a Father Jimmy Martin, and that's a huge conscience problem for a good priest. If I get thrown out, at least I can do a confession and give them good doctrine, and so it's very difficult. I would say, first of all, like our priest is doing right now, like don't jump to attack the bishops. Just flatter them, have parish councils, get some good representation, go talk to the bishop first if that's possible, try to get them on their side, because a lot of them are. We know this because we saw what they actually said to Francis during the survey. Many of them were saying, no, the traditional Mass is fine. So we know a lot of the bishops are actually open to it because it is a very healthy part of their diocese. If the bishop says absolutely not, then I think you would have to look at your options, just like they did back in the early 1970s. And some of them just said, okay, I can't do this. I got to go say Mass. And they went underground. They started a circuit. My family's home was on that circuit. They came and said Mass in our basement at an altar my father and mother had put up. The faith must come first. So I think every case is going to be a little different. But I do think priests, lay people, I mean, Bishop Schneider was pretty clear, and I certainly think he's a competent authority on this. He said the priests have got to keep saying the Mass, that we need the grace of the Mass in the world today no matter what, even if it means persecution and suffering. It's a very difficult thing for us to say it because it's got to be case by case. But I think in my opinion, the answer is I'm not going to stop saying the old Mass. And some of these priests, like, I don't know if you've heard of what's going on in Arlington, but some of them are really doing great things. Like the Holy Father said, Pope Francis said, you cannot have traditional Mass in a parochial church, parish church. So some of them are actually having Masses in like auditoriums and things to change the semantic. Like change, so it's not actually a church, we're going to be over in an auditorium. These are Novus Ordo priests who are really dedicated to serving their traditional Catholic flock. So there are end arounds that we could consider. One of the problems you have is like, why didn't the Institute of Christ the King, for example, or why didn't the priests in Arlington, why didn't they fight back? Well, here's the thing. We don't know if they're not fighting back. So it might be that some of them are fighting back more than we realize. They can't come to the remnant. They can't publicize that because they're underground somewhere. They're in somebody's basement and they're trying to keep a low profile. So we really don't know for sure to what extent priests are fighting back or are quote-unquote disobeying and saying the Mass anyway. But I know for a fact that it is happening. And we need to encourage it to happen more and just kind of see where it's going to go here. I don't think that this is a popular thing with anyone, unless you're a total McElroy or Supich. It's not going to go. I don't think it's going to have a lot of longevity, but I don't know. So I think we have to, like I say, really go case by case. I hope that gets close to answering your question.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yep.
Well, if we think about the past, it's very easy to imagine what the word underground means because it was hiding and it was possible. I'm thinking I'm from Poland during the Soviet time. I lived over there. So I'm thinking it is impossible anymore to hide. The technologies are so sophisticated that they will know about everything, anywhere, what's happening. So the meaning of the word, I think, has to be transported completely in God's hand. Because only He can provide the umbrella to hide people because it's going to be impossible. Nobody can hide
Well,
our modern time.
yeah, so she's saying it's impossible to hide. You asked to repeat the question. Impossible to hide. Only God can provide the cover that we need for the immediate future that we face. I believe it's difficult. I don't think it's impossible. I remember Tom Clancy back in the 80s used to write all these books, tell these stories about how they were able to read matchbooks from outer space and find everybody, and the satellites were doing all this stuff, and everybody's like, wow, that's scary. And then that guy, what was his name, Rudolph, the abortion doctor, the guy who shot or blew up an abortion, whatever. He broke the law and disappeared into the woods of North Carolina for something like 15 or 18 months, it seems to me, and they couldn't find the guy. I'm like, I thought you guys were watching everybody with your satellites. I mean, how good is it? I know they have amazing technology, but I don't think we should give them omniscience. And also, since they're trying to surveil everything and everyone all at once, who's keeping track of all these things? Saying a Mass is much like having a picnic in a sense. How do they know what we're doing in the basement of my house, sitting around a table having a Mass? I don't think that's a very difficult thing to do. Father Walter Sissek, when he was in prison during the Soviet years, was saying Mass in the gulag, in the prison camp, laying on his side with a bit of bread, and there was only a few priests or people around, and realized he was saying Mass. He was having Mass from his cot. So I think we need to, as Klaus Schwab says, we must reimagine the underground, and find different ways of continuing the fight and using technology. A lot of young people coming up that know how to use this technology, for one thing. Maybe we can use we can frustrate, we can jam the system somehow. I just stay away from saying our only solution is to wait for God to save us. Because ultimately He will save us. I absolutely agree. But He's also given us our hands and our ingenuity and our minds and our souls to do what we can. And I think it's important not to give up on the human spirit. Because look at somebody like Klaus Schwab. Look at Bill Gates. Bill Gates is one of the most detested people. Francis has got to be one of the most unpopular popes in history. Klaus Schwab is absolutely this guy from the World Economic. He's a meme. He's a joke. He's something out of a James Bond film. So I think a lot of the things that they're trying to convey the impression that they can just crush everything and they're like gods. But we're going to wait and see, because I think there's every reason to try to fight and frustrate their things. I told this story maybe last year. Nobody had ever heard of Davos, not nobody that I knew of, and the whole Great Reset thing. And we did a video in 2020 on Davos that took off like gangbusters. It's got 20 million views now. I've met people literally all over the world who said, I never knew about traditional Catholicism. I never knew about anything about Davos until I saw that video that Remnant TV did on Davos. Now, we're a very small, small organization. And yet, with the grace of God, as you say, the help, the inspiration, we did a video that reached millions and millions of people. And I think, in a sense, was a bit of a game changer, because there is such negative reaction now to Davos and the great lunatics of Davos. So I'm not disagreeing with you. Obviously, God, that comes first. But I think also we stand and fight and do whatever we possibly can.
Do you think that Vatican II has anything to offer traditional Catholicism?
I think, does Vatican II have anything to offer traditional Catholicism? No. Well, I mean, here's what I would say. I mean, what was going on? I like to use the example of Hollywood movies. Like, if you go, the movies have always been corrupt, and they were really, really bad in the 20s and 30s until Vigilante Curie, which was the encyclical by Pius XI on the motion picture industry, changed everything. Now Hollywood had to make sure they didn't make the Catholic Church mad, because you know what the Catholic Church used to do? They had, through the Legion of Decency, not only, if a theater played a movie that was bad, not only could the Catholics not allowed to go to that movie, but the theater owner who played the movie at his theater, you could never go back to his theater until he publicly apologized for running that film. That's the power that the Catholic Church had at the time. So I'm not saying the movies are fantastic, but if you look then, especially after 1930 moving forward, look who played Catholic priests in blockbuster films. Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Carl Malden On the Waterfront, Gregory Peck. I mean, the biggest marquee players in the world are playing Catholic priests, I confess, with Montgomery Clift. And they were respectfully doing so. So what does that tell us? The Catholic Church was fine. Just John the 23rd, he was right. Catholic Church, it had problems that we understand from Pope Pius X, with modernism creeping in, obviously. But in terms of the vitality of the church and vocations and families, having large families and so forth, the church was actually doing quite well until the moment that the sexual revolution, the cultural revolution, the moment of Vatican II, where it all fell apart. So it's hard for me to say, well, thank God that Vatican II happened, because I just can't come up with it. I'm not even trying to be a smart aleck. I actually can't come up with anything that, thank goodness, the council happened. I very much agree with Pope Benedict that it destroyed the church. It trivialized the liturgy. Now, he's not talking about the 16 documents. He's talking about the spirit of the council. But it did. That is what happened. So I don't know if you agree or disagree with me on that, but I really can't think of anything, because I know what they always say, well, the participation got so much better liturgically. I never felt like I wasn't participating in the Mass. And you look at when you see a Mass said well, and you look at those, like the altar boys, and they're in lockstep serving the Mass. They want to be like that priest. That's a knight of the altar. There's beautiful, powerful participation going on, so much so that most vocations come to young men who served at the altar of these priests. And families were enlivened and invigorated by the faith. The liturgical year was, determined the ebb and flow of the family through the feast days, the celebrations, the fasting. Everything seems to have been powerful and very good, in a good place, despite the infiltration of the modernists at a lower level. Vatican II happened, everything blew up. More than happy to be corrected on this if somebody can tell me where it is. I just can't think of anything that would be.
I have a follow-up
Yeah.
question. Do you think do you have an idea of what it would be like more ideally? Like, was there, I guess, twofold question. Was there a need for Vatican II or something like Vatican II? Or do you think that, the council is, completely ubiquitous?
Well, John the 23rd talked about opening the windows to the world and letting fresh air in. That was his main reason for. Well, he was walking in the garden, Vatican Gardens, and suddenly he heard a little voice that said, "Hey, start a council." So he did. He was old, maybe he was a little bit slipping, I don't know, but he heard a little voice and then did it. He doesn't seem to have a concrete reason for why he did it. Now, I would say, in fairness, that there had gotten to the point where there was some priests that I think, there always had been a need for reform throughout the history of the church, the orders, priesthood, and so forth. There was, I can even remember this as a child myself, where some priests were able to say the traditional Latin Mass in about 28 minutes. So there were some things like that were going on where maybe we were getting a little bit casual, a little bit, liturgically, and we needed to have a powerful leader kind of remind us of what we were. So I'm not saying everything was perfect. In fact, I really resent those who say that we believe that everything was absolutely perfect until Vatican II, and Vatican II was to blame for everything. The way I put it, and this is a lot of this has to do with the great social teaching popes, especially St. Pius X. He's back there in 1904, 1907, warning about modernism at the heart of and bosom of the church. So it's ridiculous to say, traditionalists say it only was 1965 with the council that everything went to hell. Vatican II was the great coming out party in the church. But I think it was much more of a revolution, and I think Pius X, if I dare presume, would agree with me on that they had this revolution breeding and simmering in the church for a long time. They had their opportunity to do the great reset of the Catholic Church, which is what Vatican II was, the great reset of the Catholic Church. And it exploded and did all the damage that it did as a revolutionary thing, much more, in my opinion, than as a reform issue, despite the fact that there were problems, as there's always been problems in the church long before Vatican II as well. Somewhere in there, you got to be honest, and it wasn't perfect. It was a human institution as well. There were problems in the church before Vatican II, clearly, obviously. But Vatican II did nothing but, in my opinion, make everything much, much worse.
My talk tonight is Unite the Clans, and part of uniting the clans is that the troops know where to go to church. And so I ran off the front page of the website Coalition in Support of Ecclesia Dei, and they have, you can order their current directory of the approved traditional Latin masses in the United States, updated as of February 5th, 2020. The state of Iowa, 50% of them are wrong. And then on LatinMassKendo.com, they're all wrong. They either have moved the mass time as well.
Is the coalition still going? I
don't know.
I think it might not be. They left the website up, huh?
They were as of February of 2020.
Okay.
And then so, the SSPX, they moved out of Waterloo to Bramer about 20 years ago, and they don't even have the right time.
You got a question for Michael?
Yes, I do. So I'm hoping that because you want to unite the clans, part of uniting the clans is having good information. I think that this would be a great project for you. I think would give the remnant something to talk about on podcasts and newspaper. If maybe you could unite the people who put this stuff out, organize it, and let people know where they can go to mass.
Absolutely. It's kind of pointless if we don't do that.
I live in Dyersville, and we used to have the Latin Mass there, then the priest got old, died.
I very much support. I think it's very important to get good information, especially right now. Get everybody well informed.
I met somebody that stopped in Dyersville to go to the Latin Mass, and I told them that it's no longer there. They have a Spanish Mass, and they go, gee, we had planned our whole vacation.
Oh, wow.
to be here."
Yeah, it's too bad.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I'd like to get your take on two historic Catholic individuals that I just have never been able to figure out. One you've been talking about a little bit, John the 23rd, and the other one is Thomas Merton. His name came up again with Shia LaBeouf and Bishop Barron.
Yeah.
He's one that's, I've never been able to figure out, so I was just kind of wondering what your take on those two is.
Some of those men, it's hard to. They're sort of the pre-Vatican II, and I know Thomas Merton did some beautiful things. Many people came back to the faith because of some of the things he had written. So in answering it, I wouldn't want to say I condemn him or anything, but I sort of sense in a lot of what he was doing like precursors to everything that was coming later, kind of a breakdown. This is a ridiculous comparison when it comes to mine. My father used to get really upset about Bing Crosby and Going My Way playing a priest because he said that was the Novus Ordo priest in a way, like, with the hat and the cool dude and all that stuff, no cassock, where you could see looking back. It's a great movie looking back and right now, but at the time they were saying, hey, this is kind of weird. And then they kind of connected the dots that, these things were happening. They were seeding a long time earlier. John the 23rd, kind of the same thing. I would never dare to say that everything he did was evil and can be condemned, but he is responsible for sort of opening that whole can of worms that was really, really problematic. I know there are some people, including Michael Davies, who spoke highly of him in terms of what he had, a lot of his earlier work. So I think it's, you know, you're looking back on some of that and you realize that the revolution was getting started earlier, and you can see some marks of it. Pius XII changing, you know, the Holy Week liturgy and so forth. You see it coming earlier. 1929 in Collegeville, Minnesota, they were already doing dialogue masses. You know, starting the experimentation with vernacular. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there are a lot of figures in there who are pretty good guys. I wouldn't condemn them, but they definitely showed signs of a sort of spiritual and a traditional watering down that really set things up beautifully for the revolution then that came in the mid-60s. Yes, sir.
Dave Bongino talked about going into a parallel economy, parallel function. Why this came out with the Uncle Tom Tooze premiere talking about the fight they had with YouTube and everything else. Why do Catholics, I'm sure that you had problems with YouTube also. Why do Catholics fight with YouTube? You know they don't shut you down. Why don't you go to Rumble, which is free speech, there is no censorship, and just abandon YouTube? Or anything like that along those lines?
Yeah, well, it's a problem. I mean, we spent tens of thousands of dollars developing our own platform, limit-tv.com, because YouTube was just harassing us all the time. We're also on Rumble. The problem is, y'all don't want to leave YouTube, you know, and I kind of get that. That's like a clearinghouse for everything, and you go there. They watch a lot more than I do, I guess. But so Remnant TV is an alternative to YouTube in the sense that they can't touch us. It's privately owned. We rent our own CDNs around the world, content delivery networks. They can't touch us. But what's surprising is it's doing really well, but still YouTube does better because people are just comfortable there. And the other reason for it, Rumble, on the other hand, especially over the past 6 months, nothing's happening. Like with the view count for Remnant TV and Rumble, it's in the hundreds, very low. People don't want to go there. I don't know why, but they don't. So I think that it's important for people to realize how close we are to being deplatformed completely. I saw that Robert Kennedy just got deplatformed again a few days ago, his network on YouTube and Twitter and everything else. They're coming, they're threatening us all the time. We got strikes and everything. We fight them all the time on YouTube. So it's happening, and I would think that what we want to do is try to support anybody who's trying to create that alternative, because I think they're going to, for the most part, leave us alone for a while on the internet, like our remnant-tv.com. The main thing they don't want, as we've all seen in spades over the past few years, they don't want us having access to powerful big tech social media. So I think now is the time, I guess to answer your question, to build our own alternatives. We really have to do this, and if it's Rumble or whatever, or build your own, but really try to support those who are seeing the handwriting on the wall and are like, we got to get out of here, because what happens is they cut you off on YouTube. We have 260,000 subscribers on YouTube. What they do is they cut you off overnight, and the problem is you lose all contact with your subscribers. They don't know where you went. So that's obviously a big problem with YouTube. They're just going to make you disappear, literally. And now they do it to us, for example, because they refuse to let us be monetized. They keep turning us down because we create hateful content, they say. So what they do is we have a really strong base on YouTube, but nobody sees the options over on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the YouTube player. There's no Remnant TV over there, ever, for most people. So one way or another, they're shutting us down, and a lot of people don't realize that. And one day, the Life Site Newses and the Remnants and everybody's going to be gone, and we're going to really kick ourselves, I think, and I'm not looking to raise money, by the way, for remnanttv.com at all, but I think as a movement, we're going to kick ourselves for not having really gotten more behind those who are trying alternatives to big tech now, when we have the peace and the luxury and the time to do it. I think people are going to get hit very hard after this next election, the midterm elections, if it goes the Democrat way, which probably it will in this crazy country, or they're going to cheat or whatever. But that's, I think, where we're going to see really ratcheting up against anything Christian, patriotic on the internet. So now is the time to prepare and to get the alternatives up and going that will make us less reliant on these guys. Yes, ma'am. Oh, thanks. Beer looks good.
You gonna
Thanks.
in anything, you gotta step it off. But at the same time, we should be preparing to go underground, right?
Yes. Yes.
How do we approach a priest without frightening him to death with our proposal to go underground?
As I say, every priest is going to have to. Oh, she's wondering how we approach a priest. Do we have to go underground? How do we approach it for ourselves? This whole idea of doing it, it's difficult. We don't want to be like reactionary in the bad sense. We don't want to do it if we don't have to. If we have good priests that are saying the Mass, stay with him, support him, keep him going. You know, if he's got a good relationship with his bishop, praise him for it and keep going with the Latin Mass. What he's going to do in terms of if he has to go underground is going to be up to each individual priest. But what we can do in the meantime, it seems to me, is start talking finances in our own communities to buy these churches, which are being sold for a song all over the place. At least up in Minnesota they are. Get one ready. The thing to keep in mind, and then all you have to do is try to find one priest who's willing to come and say the Mass for you. The really important thing to keep in mind, nobody's saying this is forever. We're certainly not leaving the church. We're never going to leave the church. But that we may have to go down into the catacombs for a time until sanity is restored, I think is very, very possible. The priest that married my wife and I, or married me, he was one of those underground priests in the early 1970s. He was completely cut off. He was on his own. He was living independently. By the time 1996 had come along, things had changed, and things had changed for the better. He offers a nuptial mass down in Naples, Florida, where my wife is from, and we had our nuptial mass very much out of the catacombs. So that's the expectation. This is not going to last forever, but we should be preparing for it and talking finances and talking to priests who may be in a situation where they're going to want to come over and say private masses underground. The other thing to remember is the fact that I'm standing up here before you right now in a capacity as a traditional Catholic guy who's been at it forever, it seems like, with 7 children, by the way, who are all now completely kept the traditional faith, and my older ones have graduated college. Everything, praise God, worked well. The fact that I'm doing that has a lot to do with the catacombs. Has a lot to do with the way I was raised. In other words, guys like Michael Davies and my father, they were never talking about leaving the church. They were talking about staying and defending the church. So what did? They gave us a crusade. When I was a little kid, I wanted nothing more than to be just like these guys. I wanted to be Michael Davies, this guy from England. He was like Edmund Campion. He was just such a tough guy and a believing guy, a funny guy. The crusade, or the catacombs, going underground, that's not going to be a bad thing. That's going to be the greatest Christians in the world had to go through the sufferings of catacombs and go underground for a time. So I think it's a discussion that doesn't have to be negative and scary, and it's just practical. We may have to do that. How it's going to work, we're going to have to wait and see. It's up to the individual priests.
So you said it was an unjust thing to require a priest to not say that. Because I think it is.
Right. Right, and that may be what we'll see with some of the traditional orders. They'll say you can't order me to say the new Mass, but you can order me not to say the old Mass. Is that how it works, Father? I think that might be this, and that's not for me. That's not a good solution, but that may be where they're at. That's kind of what we're seeing a little bit in Chicago right now with the Institute. They're not going to say the new Mass, but they have been ordered to not say the old Mass. Yes, Father.
I am so glad you asked that, and I'm going to leave right after you answer this question, not because what I'm going to say right now,
Right.
because I have to leave. But, and this is great, because I've heard that many times. Let's go underground, like, let's find a priest that will say Mass in our basement, or to say Mass, you have to have permission to say Mass. You can't just say Mass. When you're ordained a priest, you have permission to confess and to say Mass. That comes from the bishop. So what you're saying, in my world, is just absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the Old Testament, there's one thing that happens, like you really want to make, like, God, you want things to fall apart. That's worshiping, offering the sacrifice in a way that God doesn't command. I mean, literally Moses didn't enter the promised land before hitting the rock. And you're telling me that the solution is to go underground against the bishops? That's insane. Why do we think this has gone on so long? Why do we think this is decades in the making? Why do we think that the second that the Pope, probably by
Jackson at consecrated Russia, the Blessed Mother, which I'm not even thinking about, but he did
Mhm.
it. 2 seconds later, Roe v. Wade is gone. And we're saying, no, the solution is let's keep disobeying. Let's keep worshiping. Let's offer the sacrifice. The one thing that we should never do without, as God does command, and God commands us through the authority of the church.
Mhm.
So and I've heard this 1,000 times, and I never understood it. I don't get that part of it. And again, I'm coming from, it's kind of our brand of the, Society of Priests is, I talk a lot about obedience and stuff, which is certainly hard. And just so you understand, like, how it was played by our founder, like, everybody's losing their minds, like, all right, let's try this stuff, and then he tried it, and then we stopped doing it in 2 seconds. So, I don't know if there's something I'm missing, but this is the heart. This is the heart of what we're talking about. At SSBX, like, what's, like, my thing against, not against, I mean, I love them to death. They're amazing people. Where I think they err is, like, we don't have to obey, like, ha, 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 look at you guys. Good luck with the Traditionis, custodes. Good luck in Virginia. Good luck, we don't have to.
I haven't seen that, Father. I have not seen that kind of crowing and sadistic sort of rubbing anybody's
Really?
faces. In the SSPX, no.
Really?
Not at all.
Matt, come on, be
No, not at all.
Michael,
Not at
I'll
all.
pay you $1,000.
In fact, they're
Want me to get somebody on the phone? No. Let me
I
get
got
somebody-
$1,000 here.
Let me get somebody on the phone right now and start a conversation and see if these people.
No, you
don't
should.
back up.
You should, because if it's true, that's a scandal. And I'm not an SSPXer, but I've noticed they certainly are not doing that. They're saying this is a tragedy for the entire church if the traditional mass gets taken down. They don't want it
Michael,
to get taken out.
You're telling me, you're trying to convince me right now that the SSBX people aren't kind of like, well, come on, it's not. But either way, if they don't say it, but they're living it, right? They're living it in
Well,
the sense of.
Father, this is kind of how I answer the question. Like,
Yeah,
it's.
and I apologize. I come off strong from New Jersey, and I apologize. You know, we think SSBX are my heroes. All these guys are my heroes. And I should have presented myself a little bit more gently. But my own thing is, hopefully there's something I'm missing. I would love to be able to do that. I would love to be able to be saying mass in Brad's basement and just like do my thing. But it always comes back to that. I am a priest in the Roman Catholic Church, and it's like the hierarchical institution in the world, the OG hierarchical institution. So anyway, yeah, maybe I'm missing something.
Well, like I said in answer to the question, it's really, I'm not telling any priest what they should or shouldn't do. I'm only talking about the history of this movement. If those priests, those heroic priests who were cast out in the cold, and all they ever did, Father, they just said private masses. They said private, it wasn't advertised. By canon law, it was private masses that they said in the homes of individuals who did not have access to anything but felt banners, guitars, and crazy. And they absolutely were in the church. And as soon as a crack was opened that wide from the hierarchical establishment of the church, they were back and they were doing everything they possibly could to preserve the hierarchical structure of the church. But when it came to the deprivation, which is, I think, would be the definition of evil, to deprive the good of the traditional Latin Mass to families and kids all over the world, a bunch of them with broken hearts. This is why I took issue with that. I'm not an SSPX guy, but I took issue with it. I don't see the SSPX doing that kind of nasty thing. And I really hope, I mean, I'm not saying you're lying. I really hope it isn't happening. If it is, they shame on them, because that's not the point of this. Unite the Clans has to do with keeping the faith, supporting priests like yourself, supporting all the priests who are in positions to serve the church and to serve families as best we can. Don't take a cavalier attitude. Don't say, forget the bishop, forget the pope. We don't need to listen to them. That's not what I'm saying. This is a matter of crisis, a moment of crisis, and the faith comes first. And for some beautiful priests, like some of the Cristero priests, the Vendean priests, their bishops and Cristeros especially didn't necessarily want them to do it. Finally, Pius XI himself had to say, lay down your arms and stop. But in the interim, a lot of priests were underground saying the Mass. The Vendean priests in France, non-juring priests, were cut off from their bishops, but they were saying Mass in the woods to preserve the faith, always instructing their flock on the importance of, we need to be mindful, keep our eyes open for how God's going to resolve this. But in the moment, I have to serve my flock. I have to give the sacraments to my people. I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong. I'm just saying that's the history of this movement, where priests who didn't want to call it disobedience, they just said, I have to say the Mass for these families, and so they did it. They didn't run down underground eagerly. They found themselves in this position, and it was really hard. It was devastating. It broke their hearts. And like I say, the priest who married my wife and me, he kept a relationship with his bishop the entire time because of a concern similar to what you just enunciated. His name was Father Harry Marchowski, theologian extraordinary, seminary professor at Laval. He managed, one way or another, to keep under his bishop while he was saying private masses underground, in the basement. And we never for a second, looking at the example of that extraordinary priest, thought that he was saying, forget the hierarchy, we don't care about obedience. He was trying to get through the time. That's why I don't feel I'm in a position to tell any priest to put his neck on the line. I think we should just take every situation as it comes and have that debate about whether a priest, if he's disobeying, the only way he can disobey, as I understand this, is if it's obvious that the order is unjust and couldn't be given in the first place, if it was an evil order, evil command. I'm not going to say every single one of those orders to stop saying in the new Mass would be. I don't know. So I think it's more important that we have good conversations, that we keep our heads about ourselves, pray about it, and just try to do the best we possibly can without doing what the SSPX you said possibly is doing. That's just horrific. That divides the clans. I hate that sort of thing. And I hope it's not true, because it's really devastating if it is.
Well, yeah, so, and forget that part, but thank you very much, and I hope we can continue the discussion. I apologize if I was negative at all, or...
No apology needed, Father.
I think this is what we can talk about.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
And that's a hard conversation.
Sure it
right?
is.
And I think hopefully we continue to talk tomorrow, because these are the ideas that are essential,
And Father, I'm a layperson. People come up to me all the time and say, I can't believe how courageous you are, man. You're a hero. And I'm like, I don't have any vows of obedience. I don't have to obey a bishop. I can say what I want. So all of us who are lay people in this room should understand the massive difference between what we're allowed to do and to consider versus what a priest is allowed to do. So, I mean, don't ever trivialize the suffering of a priest or the dark nights of the soul of a priest trying to decide what to do in times like this. We really do have to have those conversations and pray for each other. So no, you don't need to apologize to me at all, Father. That's the whole purpose of.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Need a towel or anything, Mike?
No, I'm good. Yes, sir.
Dick, you go. Speak up, Dick.
What you said, Mike, about your faith. Not only priests, but also us lay people, we're going to have to choose through our faith who we're going to listen to. Obedience to God or obedience to man. This is what it's going to come
That's
down
it.
to.
That's it.
We're all going to be challenged, and it's based on your faith. If you believe, then you will serve God. If not, you will serve man. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And that's the thing. I'm a lay person, so when it comes to what I feel like I can do before the divine Godhead, I don't think God's going to condemn me to the bowels of hell for disobeying Pope Francis, the globalist who's trying to rape the blood of the mystical body of Christ. I just don't think that's going to.
What did Peter and James say when they were taken before the Sanhedrin?
Right.
They said their obedience is to God.
Right.
Because of the truth.
And
Not because of man or any leader of
Right.
the church that is not standing with God.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing to keep in mind. Pope Francis is not telling me to do anything or not to do anything. So I'm not even at that juncture yet where I have to decide if I have to obey him. And that's why genuinely, Father's gone now, but I'm not upset by that question at all. Every priest is going to have to go through this. What am I going to do? When is enough enough, and when am I going to have to make the stand for God and for the faith, which comes first, versus obedience, which is not a theological virtue, it's a natural virtue. So at some point, you're going to have to, as I see it as a mere layman, not a theologian, at some point, if the faith is going to be injured by obedience, then we miss the spirit of the law. The whole purpose of the church's teaching on obedience is to preserve and protect the faith. So if at some point in the process of obeying we harm the faith, my faith is based on, or my church is based on faith and reason. It seems utterly unreasonable that I would have to obey the commands of Satan himself just because he happens to have a Roman collar on or a bishop's mitre on. I can't get that. I can't get that far. But what we can all agree on is this is an unprecedented crisis such as no one's ever seen. I really believe it's much worse than the Arian heresy. It's an unbelievable crisis. And so it might be that it's going to take a little longer to find this out and figure this out, what we're going to do. And so we need to be really obviously prayerful and patient with each other as we try to figure this out. That seems to be obvious, and we can all agree on that.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, we're bumping up against the clock. It's 8 o'clock, and some of you need to get going home. Michael will be open for some questions one-on-one here for a while. We got you all going for First Fridays here, and there's an announcement in October. We're doing First Friday on First Thursday. Evidently, there's this big wedding. Samantha's invited a bunch of people to her wedding on First Friday in October. God bless Samantha. Where's she at? Her face is now almost as red as her hair. God bless her. So anyway, First Thursday in October, and it's Robert Gill is coming up right here to this room. There'll be mass at 5. I confirm that. We'll have mass upstairs, confessions. We can have, it's not on Friday, so we can have pizza with all kinds of meat on it. Is that right, Brad? And we're going on here. And round 2 between Father Del Priore and Marco Van tomorrow morning at Bonnie's Coffee Shop here. Now, it doesn't seat this many people, so I don't know what happened. God bless you all.